Economic sanctions are a powerful tool, often wielded with the intent to reshape global dynamics. The United States, for decades, has used them to try and influence the behavior of other nations, aiming to steer international policies in a direction that aligns with its own strategic interests. These sanctions aim to inflict economic pain, creating financial pressure that can cripple economies and disrupt daily life. The goal is to force governments to change their policies, often in areas deemed critical by the US, such as governance, human rights and security. These policies can range from human rights violations to nuclear proliferation, addressing issues that have far-reaching implications for global stability and security. Sanctions can involve various measures, each designed to target specific sectors of a nation's economy. These can include trade embargoes, asset freezes, and travel restrictions, all of which can severely limit a country's ability to engage in international commerce and finance. While presented as a peaceful alternative to military action, sanctions have profound consequences that can be just as devastating. They impact the lives of ordinary citizens in the targeted nations, often leading to widespread poverty, unemployment, and social unrest. The US is by far the world leader in imposing sanctions, utilizing its economic power to influence global affairs. No other country comes close to the sheer number and scope of sanctions imposed by the US, which has a long history of leveraging its economic might. This raises important questions about the role of the US in global affairs and whether its actions are always justified. Is it a benevolent power promoting positive change, or a bully wielding its economic might to impose its will on others? The debate is ongoing. The answer, as with most things in international relations, is complex and multifaceted, requiring a deep understanding of the geopolitical landscape. It requires a nuanced understanding of the history, intent and impact of US sanctions, which have evolved over time. The use of sanctions is not new. They have been a feature of international relations for centuries, dating back to ancient trade embargoes and diplomatic pressures. They have been a feature of international relations for centuries, used by empires and nations to exert influence without resorting to war. However, the end of the Cold War saw a dramatic increase in their use as the geopolitical landscape shifted and new opportunities for influence emerged. This was partly due to the emergence of the US as the sole superpower, with unparalleled economic and military capabilities. It was also driven by the growing acceptance of sanctions as a lighter form of intervention compared to military force, seen as a more humane and less destructive option. However, the effectiveness of sanctions in achieving their stated goals remains a subject of intense debate, with many questioning their true impact. Critics argue that sanctions often fail to change the behavior of targeted regimes. They can even backfire, entrenching the very policies they aim to dismantle. This can happen by strengthening the resolve of targeted governments and harming the very people they are supposed to help, leading to unintended and often tragic consequences. Understanding the complex and often unintended consequences of sanctions is crucial, as they can have far-reaching effects that extend beyond their immediate targets. This is especially true in an increasingly interconnected world, where the use of economic coercion has become a central feature of US foreign policy, shaping the global order in profound ways. The use of economic sanctions by the United States has evolved significantly over the years, adapting to the changing geopolitical landscape and the priorities of different administrations. Each presidential administration has brought its own unique approach to this powerful foreign policy tool, reflecting their distinct philosophies and strategic goals.
The presidency of George W. Bush saw a significant expansion of sanctions, particularly in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, which reshaped US foreign policy. The Bush administration aggressively targeted countries accused of supporting terrorism, using sanctions as a primary tool to exert pressure. This included countries like Iran and North Korea, which were already under US sanctions but faced even stricter measures under Bush's tenure.
The Obama administration continued the use of sanctions, but also emphasized multilateralism, seeking to work with international partners. Obama sought to build international coalitions to impose sanctions, believing that a united front would be more effective. This approach was particularly evident in the case of Iran, where the US worked with other world powers to negotiate a nuclear deal. The deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, lifted some sanctions on Iran in exchange for significant curbs on its nuclear program.
The Trump administration took a sharply different approach, withdrawing the US from the JCPOA and reimposing stringent sanctions on Iran. Trump embraced a more unilateral approach to sanctions, often acting independently of international consensus. He imposed sanctions on a wide range of countries, including traditional allies like Turkey, reflecting his unpredictable foreign policy style. Trump's use of sanctions was often seen as a tool for economic nationalism, aimed at protecting American jobs and businesses from foreign competition.
The Biden administration has maintained many of the Trump-era sanctions, recognizing their strategic importance. However, Biden has also sought to re-engage with allies and use sanctions more strategically, aiming for a balanced approach. The Biden administration has emphasized the importance of diplomacy and multilateralism in addressing global challenges, seeking to restore America's leadership on the world stage. It remains to be seen how the Biden administration's approach to sanctions will differ from its predecessors in the long term. However, one thing is clear: sanctions will continue to be a key tool of US foreign policy for the foreseeable future, shaping international relations and global politics. Few countries have felt the sting of US sanctions as acutely as Venezuela. The impact has been profound and far-reaching, affecting nearly every aspect of life in the country. Once a thriving economy fueled by its vast oil reserves, Venezuela has experienced a dramatic economic collapse in recent years. The oil industry, which was once the backbone of the nation's economy, now lies in ruins, with abandoned factories and refineries standing as stark reminders of better days. While the Venezuelan government blames the US and its sanctions for the country's woes, the situation is more complex. The interplay of various factors has created a perfect storm that has devastated the economy.
A combination of factors, including government mismanagement, corruption, and falling oil prices, have contributed to the crisis. The government's inability to effectively manage the country's resources has only worsened the situation. However, there is no doubt that US sanctions have exacerbated Venezuela's economic problems. These sanctions have targeted key sectors of the economy, making it nearly impossible for the country to recover. Sanctions targeting Venezuela's oil industry have crippled its ability to export oil, a crucial source of revenue for the country. Without this revenue, the government has struggled to provide basic services and maintain infrastructure.
This has had a devastating impact on the Venezuelan economy, leading to hyperinflation, shortages of basic goods, and a humanitarian crisis. The cost of living has skyrocketed, making it difficult for ordinary citizens to afford even the most basic necessities. The impact of sanctions on ordinary Venezuelans has been profound. Families are struggling to put food on the table, and malnutrition has become a widespread issue, particularly among children. Millions have fled the country in search of a better life. The exodus has created a refugee crisis in neighboring countries, straining their resources and creating new challenges. Those who remain face a daily struggle to make ends meet. Long lines for food and basic goods have become a common sight, and small businesses are closing down at an alarming rate. The economic crisis has led to a breakdown in social order with rising crime and violence. The streets of Venezuela have become increasingly dangerous, and the police are often overwhelmed. The healthcare system has collapsed, and malnutrition is widespread. Hospitals are unable to provide adequate care, and pharmacies are often empty, leaving people without access to essential medications.
The case of Venezuela highlights the devastating impact that sanctions can have on civilian populations. The suffering of the people is a stark reminder of the unintended consequences of such measures. While the US government argues that sanctions are aimed at the Venezuelan government and its corrupt officials, the reality is more complicated. The reality is that ordinary Venezuelans are bearing the brunt of these measures. The sanctions have not only failed to bring about political change but have also deepened the suffering of the people. The situation in Venezuela is a stark reminder of the human cost of sanctions and the need for a more nuanced approach to their use. It calls for a re-evaluation of how such measures are implemented and their long-term impact on civilian populations.
Iran has lived under the spectre of US sanctions for over 4 decades. The initial wave of sanctions was imposed in 1979 following the Iranian Revolution and the seizure of the US embassy in Tehran. These sanctions were further tightened over the years in response to Iran's nuclear program and support for groups designated as terrorist organizations by the US.
The impact of sanctions on the Iranian economy has been significant. Iran has been largely cut off from the global financial system. This has made it difficult for Iran to access international markets and conduct business with the rest of the world. Sanctions have also targeted key sectors of the Iranian economy, including its oil and gas industry, which has limited its ability to export its energy resources.
Despite the challenges, Iran has shown a remarkable resilience in the face of sanctions. The Iranian government has implemented policies aimed at mitigating the impact of sanctions. These include import substitution, promoting domestic production, and developing alternative financial channels. Iran has also sought to strengthen ties with countries not aligned with the US.
The Iranian case raises important questions about the effectiveness of sanctions as a long-term foreign policy tool. While sanctions have undoubtedly imposed economic costs on Iran, they have not succeeded in changing the Iranian government's behavior or achieving the US's stated objectives.